is Jane Nuzzo. I'm the Director of Alumni Affairs at SBA. And it's my really great pleasure to welcome you this evening to the conversation, Truth and Reconciliation, which is being presented in conjunction with American Truth, a multi-centric survey of contemporary America, seen through the lens-based work of 20 SBA alumni artists, all distinguished graduates of the college's photography programs. Of course, on view now right here at the Chelsea Gallery, and is open through this Saturday. In American Truth, exhibiting artists present objects and images that reflect a multitude of American experiences, with a focus on the moments that are often missed, ignored, polemicized, made invisible, or even erased by the mainstream media. This exhibition explores our collective understanding of others and ourselves as people living in America. Tonight's conversation will be moderated by exhibition curator and activist Jasmine Wahi. Jasmine is an MFA Fine Arts faculty member at SBA and founder and co-director of Project for Empty Space, a nonprofit arts organization in Newark, New Jersey, whose mission is to create multidisciplinary art exhibitions and programming that encourages social dialogue, education, and systematic change through the support of both artists and communities. Jasmine's practice predominantly focuses on issues of female empowerment, complicating binary structures within social discourses, and exploring multi-positional cultural identities through the lens of intersectional feminism. She's joined this evening by three of the participating artists. Melvin Harper received his MFA in photography, video, and related media from SBA. He's an English-born visual artist and art director working in the mediums of film, sculpture, and mixed media. Kathy Shore received her BFA in photography from SBA, as well as an MS in education, earned while serving as a New York City teaching fellow working in the public schools in crisis. Born in Brooklyn, New York, her work crosses the borders of documentary, portraiture, and street photography. And Hector Rene Magrano Canales also received a BFA in photography from SBA, as well as an MFA from the Department of Art and Art History at Hunter College. He was born in San Pedro Sula, Honduras, and grew up in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Hector served more than a decade as a U.S. Army photographer with international posts including Iraq, El Salvador, Poland, and more. And he continues to work as an educator, photographer, and visual artist. And unfortunately, BFA photography alumnus Brian Fink is unexpectedly unable to join us this evening, but Jasmine will be addressing his work. From street photography to commercial portraiture to fashion editorials, Brian's immersion in culture at large creates imagery that is deeply tied to the political and emotional undertones of the modern world. Throughout the course of this evening, as Jasmine leads the conversation, there will be opportunity for Q&A. We do have a microphone that we will ask that you speak into for the recording that's taking place. So when the time comes, if you do have a question, and Jasmine will guide that, please raise your hand, and we do want to make sure to get you on the mic. Without further ado, thank you so much for joining us. And Jasmine, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. So I just realized that I have no sense of time. So Jane or anyone, if anyone can just sort of like raise a hand when it's been about half an hour, that would be fantastic. So thank you so much, Jane. Thank you to SBA Gallery and the entire team for letting us do this show here. And thank you especially to all of the artists for participating. This evening's conversation is about something probably not totally apparent when you first walk into the exhibition. So I'll speak a little bit about the exhibition first. American Truth was mostly inspired by, and I hate to give credit to this, but was inspired by a organization called the American Truth Project. When I say inspired by, that's a little bit of a misnomer. When I started thinking about this exhibition, I was thinking about what concepts of truth were, whether or not there really are actually any absolute truths in the world. and whether or not truth exists beyond the idea of our perspectives. For example, I think that it's true that the earth is round, but there are still people out there who would disagree with me, and for them that is not a truth, it's a fallacy. To more perhaps relevant examples, there are people in the world who do not believe in systemic racism. I believe that systemic racism is a reality. So point being is that what we may take to be true is only relative to us and the people around us. So that's sort of the root of the exhibition. Now when I thought about truth and I thought about the political moment that we're in, one that is fairly, on appearances, fairly divided, I thought, what happens if I Google, because I Google everything, American truth? And the first thing that popped up was the American Truth Project, which is a fairly extreme conservative group led by a conservative media mogul that propagates truth as certain things like Sharia law is real and coming for us and coming to take our children and convert all of us to Islamic terrorists. Things such as racism does not exist. So those types of things are presented as truth. So I thought about how interesting it is that this is the agenda that's being pushed as factual, and I started thinking about what types of media or popular culture that I consume that are also pushed as being some form of truth. And from that I realized the relativity of the idea of truth. So in coming up with the exhibition, I thought about what does American truth mean to me? And I divided this exhibition into 6 different sections, starting from what's may appear to be more innocuous images of American landscapes, the American family, albeit not necessarily what one would think of in a Leave It to Beaver sort of sense of what the American family is. A section that we're sitting in right now about everyday Americans, the people who you might not necessarily see or hear from in the mainstream media, but exist nonetheless and should be part of our collective zeitgeist if they're not already. There's a section on the American woman, which is the section right next to us. One on infrastructure and ingenuity, which talks about American systems, which Hector is part of. And finally, the section interpersonal relationships, which has kind of a misleading name, but really is about the very prominent, and I, in my essay, I think call it a zeitgeist, but the very prominent presence of violence as a definitive part of our culture, whether it is violence in the sense of Brian's work, where violence is being used as a tool to mitigate other types of violence, or whether violence is part of the infrastructure of our country, or whether, the sanctioned infrastructure of our country, or if it's the types of violence that we do unto each other, often lethal and often really pushed by guns and firearms. So that's a little bit about the exhibition. Before we move on, I'm actually going to ask each of the artists to share a little bit about their practice, sort of generally, but also if you could each sort of emphasize the work, the body of work that you have in the exhibition, that would be great. Who would like to start?
Well, I think because I'm holding the mic, I should probably get started. So good evening, everyone. I feel like I'm in such good company. A little bit about my practice. So I'm trained as an Army photographer. So I did that before completing my BFA at SVA. And I always thought that this idea of truth was rather dubious in the photographs that I took in an official capacity. So when I look at images that are frequently found in our media, I'm so skeptical of them, which is why I look for other places for these images of violence. So I feel like I'm looking to advertising, I'm looking to the archive, because I feel like if we can collect those things, then we can begin to see where patterns present themselves. So that's just a little bit about my practice. Now, I will say that because I am trained in military photography, that I do feel comfortable in a documentary tradition. So I do shoot on the street, I do photograph military exercises, but those military exercises, although soldiers are jumping out of planes, although they are firing weapons, they're staged. So how are these images used is really what led me to further investigate how the military is represented. Because as an official photographer, I think a lot about FSA photography, or in Brian Fink's work. You know, I have taught from that work. The U.S. Marshals Project I thought was really amazing work, because when we leave it up to an institution to represent itself, it's always going to represent itself in the best light. So that's just a little bit about what this project is about, and my work broadly.
Okay, and we're going to come back to the updates.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. My project started out as an idea that I had about looking at survivors. When I was teaching, I would always have students come in with memorial cards around their neck with photographs of friends, family that had passed away from gun violence. And I would say, you know, like, these people that have died have become folk heroes, but no one ever talks about who survives, who's out there living with injuries, mental health issues from what happened to them. They've just become forgotten. So there were three things that got me on this project of survivors. Another was that I myself had been in a home invasion when my daughter was a little toddler. We had two men dressed as postal workers come to my apartment in Greenwich Village, and they actually had a package with them and pushed in the door, and within 2 seconds I had a gun pointed at my face, and two men who I had no idea whether they were going to shoot us or what they were going to do. And I have experienced having a gun pointed at me and the person I love most, and I never wanted that to happen to anybody else. So it's part of my psyche. It's not something I think about all the time, but I have experienced looking at a gun and not knowing, and the uncertainty of it. And also I felt that society, and I started the project in 2013. At that time, I felt that society had become very polarized. Everything was black and white. There was no more gray anymore. And guns were an issue that had polarized everyone, and no one talked about the gray area in the middle, which was the important part. So I felt if I could bring a face to survivors who would know the most about what guns can do to people, and if I could take something that was an abstraction and humanize it and have a dialogue start. I wasn't against, and I'm not against guns, I should say that right away. I don't have a gun, I have no interest in a gun, but I think that most gun owners are responsible gun owners, and I'm not interested in the philosophy of take their guns away, because I don't think that will ever happen. But I felt if we could get responsible gun owners to look at this project and talk, as well as people who hated guns, that the dialogue would open with it. So the project isn't meant to be political. It's called Shot 101 Survivors of Gun Violence in America. There are many gun owners in the project, and there are all kinds of people, every race, many ethnicities, ages 8 to 80, because gun violence is something that can happen to anyone, and it's something that we all have to start talking about. So that's how the project evolved.
Hi everyone, my name is Melvin Harper. This is my work all the way in the back, some videos. My primary interest is this meta language in any video, whether or not it's something that you see from like a closed circuit TV cam, or if it's something that you see from a protest or somebody captured it on their phone, or if it's a Hollywood movie. I'm interested in the precedents that the production process has set for any kind of visual media. So if you watch like an old Hollywood film or an old Western or something, and then there's a cut, and then there's some action, and then there's a stunt, and it's all really methodical. And I think that that methodology has taken its own place, and it now gets reproduced in everything that we watch. So we kind of follow this language of the production process. And that production process that was sort of generated mainly in the 1950s is like, you know, fraught with all these kind of problems of racism, misogyny, I mean, endless demographic issues. So the work that I make, I'm never really trying to make like a piece and like, this is the piece and this is what you guys should get from it. I'm confused. I've always been really confused about how people decide what's black, what's white, what's female, what's not, and how they are able to justify that, substantiate that to themselves, that that isn't just part of this capitalism or whatever the current paradigm is. So I've always been confused about these things, and the work is my confusion. I just go through it, find these different materials, and I'm trying to work out as well what motivates these different institutions or people to do these things. And the video that comes out of it is kind of like my lesson to myself about these different factors that motivate what the videos are talking about, which is like a heavy discrimination, particularly for some reason around traffic violations and people moving in vehicles.
I hope no one came here for a really light talk. Just realized that this might be kind of heavy, but that's okay, we're all in it now, so we're gonna keep going. I actually, in spirit of lightness, would like each of you to, again, briefly speak about the way that you are composing images, again, within the context of this show. Because the images that we're using of your work, Hector, are within the vein of the type of propaganda. And I also would love it if we talk a little bit about the objects, because I find them very funny, but also a little bit insidious in some ways. And then, you know, Melvin, you're using found footage and creating sort of pastiche. And I wonder if you could talk about some of the source material for that. And then Kathy, your works are of people who have agreed to be photographed, but they are in a pretty, I wouldn't say traditional, but they're in a portrait style. And so I'm wondering if you can also talk a little bit about that process, because they are, I think for some of them, if you didn't know, like Jasmine's photo, if you didn't know what the context was, you might not know that it's not a formal portrait. So if you could talk a little bit about that, and anyone can start.
Again, holding the mic. So my project, it's titled An Index of Patriotic Consumption. And it was born out of a couple failed projects. You know, as most artists would know, every time you have an idea and you start a project doesn't mean that it's gonna bear fruit. So I remember sitting in a crib, bringing old World War II adverts to a crit space, and I had a professor say, you know, I already know this story. I've already seen it. I know that these products were used to perpetuate some idyllic concept of patriotic duty. There were victory gardens, save your pantyhose, all of these things that were used during that era. She said, surprise me. Tell me how this is happening today. And that was really hard. But surely it does exist. And I remember going back to my hometown, Allentown, Pennsylvania, and I took my kid sister to see some film. I don't remember which one, but we have this tradition when I go back home, I take my kid sister to the movies. And before we go to the movies, we go to the Red Robin across the street. And we ordered a burger in a basket with some fries. And there was a Heinz ketchup bottle that said, our turn to serve, with an American flag on it. And it really caught me by surprise. And it was kind of serendipitous that it came on the heels of this critique I just had that did not go well. So I was still thinking about it. And I said, Heinz, what about Heinz? What is their relationship to my patriotic duty, or what I perceive are the reasons that I joined the military? Because the reason I joined the military was not for patriotic duty. I immigrated to the United States in '92 and didn't speak a lick of English. And by the time I was graduating high school, the reason I joined the Army was because I had no power, and I needed some proximity to power. I needed some agency. And, those are very different reasons for why mainstream media sells the idea of why people join the military. The military is there are many people in it. I don't mean to describe it as a monolith, but there are a lot of people in it who are vulnerable. And I don't mean to speak broadly, but that was my experience. So, I remember thinking, what kind of skin in the game does Heinz have? And, I too Google everything, and Heinz is a Fortune 500 company. And then I went to CVS a few weeks later, and I saw a Johnson & Johnson pack of Band-Aids with the same digital camo pattern on them. And slowly I started to collect these objects. And then I was on a military post because, full disclosure, I'm still in the Army Reserve. So I still have a relationship to the institution. And I was on a military post, and I saw a vendor selling little Lego figurines. And if you're familiar with the work in the third gallery, that's where a lot of that comes from. And it's, again, back to this idea that the institution is presenting itself. As I started to collect these objects, I brought them back to a follow-up crit to redeem myself. And a classmate brought my attention to a congressional report by the late John McCain and Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona. And it was titled Paid Patriotism. It was about 80 pages. And as the diligent graduate student, I read it. And I learned that the Pentagon had paid tens of millions of dollars to the NFL. And that money was used for re-enlistment ceremonies, flyovers, and that's how you would end up with little yellow ribbons on the side of Budweiser cans at baseball games and football games. And the NFL is presenting this as a way to say, we are in it too. We believe in this fight, but really it's not altruistic. They're looking for the same demographic as military recruitment, which is male 18 to 24. And that's the same demographic that joins the military, is the same demographic that loves football. And they'll go on to love football for the rest of their lives, of course. But once you bake that ideology into a national consciousness early on and make that patriotic duty akin to consumption, that's how we end up manifesting the military-industrial complex. So that is how I was really interrogating these objects, because for me, I felt like, how am I being misrepresented, And that's just, one way. Like, veteran is just one of the many moniker is in my identity. You know, I'm an immigrant. I identify as Latinx. I identify as an artist, photographer, lens-based artist. You know, there are all these identifiers, but oftentimes they're all misrepresented because we've left them up to somebody else to define for us. So I feel like my role as the artist is to sort of dismantle some of those notions. So that's I guess that I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with the concept, the idea that I started with before, which I spoke about. So when you have a big idea like that, and with a subject that people may not want to work with you about because it's very personal, I was mulling about the idea for a few weeks, and I was getting ready, and I had my TV on, and New York 1 was on, and somebody was on New York 1 talking about how he had been shot about 6 weeks prior to that. And I stopped what I was doing and started listening, and he had this great name to Google. It was an Indonesian name that had like 25 letters in it, so I knew that I could find him, and he lived in Brooklyn. So I found him, and I sent him an email telling him about what I wanted to do, and would he be interested in being the first person. And he said yes.
Sorry, had you already thought of the idea for the project prior to this?
Well, I thought that I would photograph survivors. That was the idea, the big idea. Then it gets narrowed down. So I said, all right, that's great. I'm thinking of photographing the survivors also at the place where they were shot. Would you be interested in doing that too? And he said, all right, I'll do it. So I went to meet him, and it was probably 8 weeks out, and he was really seriously injured. He's, if anybody has seen my work, his torso has a red corrugated metal gate behind it, and he's cut down the middle where he was shot. And we went to he said to me, I took a Xanax, is that okay? I said, of course, I mean, you know, that's fine. So we went over to the location, and I started photographing, and people started coming over and saying I was here that day, because it was a crowded Brooklyn street in the middle of the day on a Saturday. And they were saying, oh, I'm so glad that you're alive. And it was just really amazing, the love that came out from strangers for him and the concern. So then I said to him when I was, do you think that I could photograph your scar? I hadn't really, he was kind of, I'll say guinea pig, and I don't mean that in any other way than the fact that that was my first person, and I was experimenting, seeing how far I could go with this idea. And he said, lifted his shirt up, he said, sure. Afterwards, when we were walking back to the car, he said, I feel so good, thank you. And I was amazed. I said, why are you thanking me? And he said, because I came back to this place and I'm not afraid of it anymore. I took it back. So I thought, wow, if the survivors are going to be feeling so good that they're going to thank me, then this is possible to do. So that's how I got to the point where I felt confident that I could do this. And a project like this takes hours and hours of research. I spent days on the computer looking for people, especially when you are working on your budget, that's your savings, because you have to go around the country and you have to make trips work for you where you're going to get like 3 or 4 people in a location. So if you fly someplace, you can see people in 2 days and then go back. So it's you're strategizing, you're looking for people, you're strategizing, and then I would have conversations with people via email, or actually some people from some of the more prominent high-profile shootings like Aurora, the Gabby Gifford shooting. I actually wrote old-fashioned letters because I Googled survivors from those events and then wrote people letters. And in all of them, someone wrote back to me said, yes, I want to do that. So when I went on location, I would never photograph anyone without speaking to them and being with them prior. So that, to me, is the most important part of photographing somebody, is having a sense of them, having them have a sense of me, and everybody feeling comfortable. So I would always meet at a Starbucks or coffee shop. I actually tried to get Starbucks to give me some money, but they didn't. I thought this would be great. So we would talk, and most people I spoke to a half hour to an hour. One person I actually spoke with at her home in Seattle for 3 hours. And then the photographing is kind of, I call it guerrilla photography, because it's not like I know where I'm going. I'm going to the location where they were shot. So I've never seen this place. And of course, if you're a photographer, you have to make your background interesting, or you have to have other things in the photographs work with it. So you're on a limited time. You're, the weather, if most of the photographs are outside, so the weather plays a very important factor in this. And having the rapport with the person, and the person that you're photographing, the survivor, trusting you and wanting to go through with it. So it's many different levels that have to work, and I was very lucky. I had 2 people say no, that they didn't want to do it. The survivors were very generous and said that if me being part of this project can help one person, I want to do it. So I had some bad weather, and I'd say, if not everyone, maybe one person was a little finicky with me, but it was amazing how well things went, and I was lucky.
Jasmine, will you respond, please?
Just can you talk a little bit about the source materials that you're using, and sort of the process of pulling them together? And in this, the video first-person shooter has material from all types of different places. So if you could talk about that a little.
Sure. In the beginning, I always wanted to find footage that was some kind of perspective that it appeared that it wasn't planned, or that there was no premeditation behind it. So somebody pulling out their camera, or somebody live streaming themselves on Facebook. Those seem like new perspectives to me. But again, like what I was saying earlier, new perspectives, but then they get populated with all of this precedence from the history of film and television. So I was looking for these kind of rare footage, and in order to get that, some of these videos, they don't get released at all. Some of them get released, years later. Some of them are tampered with. Some of them have errors to them. So I was just trying to find all of these kind of these little blips that you hear in the news and find the full footage from. And in order to do that, I had to get like a VPN and go to some different sites where you would find certain material. And that, ironically, was where all of this material is at. And on YouTube and on these sites that are primarily for porn, this archive generates itself of brown people shooting themselves. Because if you Google, or if you go on YouTube and you look for the same phenomenon amongst different races, you don't see it. But if you go on YouTube, you can see hundreds of people taking footage of other brown people shooting each other, brown people shooting them, just bystanders, and that fascinated me that on YouTube there's I mean, thousands of these videos that were very specific to a demographic.
Or public, just on regular YouTube.
Yeah. As if it was some macabre channel, you know, that they were looking for subscribers to, because there was so much of this content on there. And then that expanded to looking at people filming themselves, and particularly people filming themselves and then getting shot. The impetus for not this work but the previous work was Chicago right now. I don't know how many people know much about Chicago, but it's just littered with this kind of gang mentality that is generations old. People get born into it, they don't even really know what they're fighting for, and there's this gun war that is just about pride, maybe. Obviously backed up by all of this historical residual that you have in America about race relations. So I was finding all of this different material, and then it was just really interesting to me how much it looked like Hollywood films, how much like one cut was like, I'm fascinated with the history of film production. And so I've seen every old movie and all Westerns. I watch like 4 a day, I'm obsessed. But anyway, how this trauma in this real video looks like this Oscar-winning Western. Or this fall here looks like this fall. And so that was just really interesting to me, how much of it was imputed in there, how much of it was just naturally occurring. And then the same way that the production process manipulates you through its cuts, its perspectives. So then I wanted to take that footage and use it the same way that Hollywood does to sort of disturb us. And through the process of making, I start off by building this like archive of all of this footage, which usually starts off with like the news headlines of whichever brown person has been shot recently. And I try to find that footage, try to find the full footage. It's always heavily doctored. Different media institutions have different versions of it. And then finally you'll find the original version that either the prosecutor or the sheriff's department let out. And that's just fascinating to me. It's fascinating how much money on that production process of this camera here, or the camera on the dash, or that camera up there. That this process is going on for like this, like almost like Foucaultian opticon, right? Like there's nobody actually watching that. I mean, there might be some security guy, but it's all being recorded for something that none of us know what is, something that's supposed to come in the future. And that is really disturbing to me, that we're all sort of being observed by ourselves, but it's displaced. And then, like I said, this like Foucaultian opticon through the Facebook Live and through the CCTV and through the YouTube and all of that stuff. So yeah, and then just putting the footage together to try and make something disturbing from it. Which usually, with the other videos, it follows a film, you know, with the arc, and at the end it has this like denouement of culmination of the whole thing, and some really nice music accompanying some terrible event. Yeah, so that's how they get made, and they also, I try not to make them too installation based. Like I want that to go anywhere that a film can go, anywhere that you can watch a video, because then it's just kind of unsuspecting and you're just watching something and all of a sudden there's this brutality or trauma in it.
Okay, I'm gonna ask one more quick question for each of you. I'm gonna actually start with you, Melvin. Something you just said struck a chord with me in thinking about how people have reacted to that work, and you said you wanted to make something disturbing, but for me, every, you know, I'm just gonna turn, you guys can all hear me, right?
Use this one.
Oh, okay. Better without. I think they need it for the camera.
Yeah, I think it might be out of
The,
reception.
You want to make something disturbing, but every aspect of all of those videos, but particularly first-person shooter, is incredibly disturbing. And I wonder what you think about the difference in how we consume violent imagery. Are we just so desensitized to it at this point? And there are certain elements of that video that I recognize from seeing them on Facebook Live, or seeing them on the news. And I'm just wondering, are you desensitized to these images that are happening in real time? Are all of us desensitized to them? Or is the fact that these are all, with the exception of, you know, they're obviously constructed video games, is there a difference, or is it at this point, do you think, between what's happening in real life and what we're seeing as constructed media? And does that change how disturbing it might be?
Wow. So I collect them all, and I go months in between without doing a film. I collect all the footage and then watch it because it's really hard. And I'll work on it and just be a horrible person to deal with for a few months, and then I'll let it go. And that's kind of my process with it, because it's too. I didn't actually grow up in America. My dad's American. I grew up in England, and it wasn't until I came over here later on that I realized how polarized racial tensions are here. I mean, that's not to say that they're not everywhere in the world, but I just didn't realize what they were here. So culturally, America's TV looks very different from the TVs that are, right? And everything is like red line. There's like 4 ticker tapes going all across the screen, and it's breaking news. This is an emergency. And in that kind of climate, I don't know how you can take anything seriously, really. Most people don't get to see that full video. They don't get to see the part with the Philando Castile's
Wife,
his girlfriend, and then his daughter. And I think that if at length we were to watch them, then maybe it would be a different discussion. But yeah, it seems too regular, too common an occurrence here for it to really stir up any real problem, you know? Like a forest fire seems like more of a priority here than another shooting. The last guy on the first person shooter, the most recent video, yeah, that's Philando Castile. And the cop, the way that he executes the guy. And then this is even the problem now, that there's so many people. Like I used to, when I was in school, I'd hold myself to this. Every time I was going through the footage, I'd research everybody and people's names and how they were in that situation. And it becomes more and more people that you're like, is that Stephen Clark, or was that Philando Castile that did this? And I think that's the same thing that gets put out to everybody else, is that it just seems like more of the same. Everybody knows there's a problem, but what really to do about it? Yeah.
So, kind of a similar question, and a little sort of anecdote for you, Kathy. I'm wondering if you have noticed the way that when people interact with your work, if there's also a sense of desensitization, or maybe not apathy, but sort of an ambivalence around this topic. And before you answer that, I just want to say, I think one of the really impactful aspects of this work is not only for us as the sort of stranger audience coming to the work without
necessarily knowing the background or context, but the effect it seemed to have on not only the survivors, but as you said before, their families, where we had Shirley's family who came here for the opening, and to me that's been really striking. So it does have a great impact. I had this really wonderful conversation with her sister, talking not only about the work, but about the necessity to get the word out from a very personal place as a way to get people to really understand and be more involved in actually doing something about gun violence. And I'm wondering if that has been your experience across the board when people encounter the work, or have you faced sort of an apathy or ambivalence?
I think that the project has gotten enthusiasm from all over America. I was on talk radio in Bozeman, Montana, and one of the people in the project was a guy in Bozeman who was shot after telling somebody at a party to, leave. Very similar to the circumstance that happened to somebody in Chicago. Shot the same exact kind of thing. A party, tell somebody to leave, boom, they come back with a gun. When I got to the radio station and I heard the man talking, I was booked for an hour, and I said to the woman outside of the studio, "Is he a Trumpster?" And she went like this. And I was like, oh my God, I have an hour in here with this man in Bozeman, Montana to talk about guns, and he likes Trump. It turned out he was originally from Staten Island, an Italian guy from Staten Island who lived out west as an adult, and we got along very well. And he loved the book, because he said to me, I don't want some crazy person online in the supermarket behind me carrying a gun that's going to go off on me. So he wrote a glowing review of the book on the website, and in the bottom corner were Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck and all the right-wing talk show people for the page for this radio station. So I felt that was my proudest accomplishment, because I had a person who was very different than me, but we connected on the similarities. So that was my goal, to have everybody in the book be able to identify with someone in the project. And if you couldn't identify with the person physically, then perhaps you would be able to identify with the fact, and now it's happened since then, but that a woman police officer was shot by her husband in the Walmart parking lot because she go to Walmart, and that could be me. So there were all these kinds of ways to connect people rather than to push them apart that I tried to work with. I tried to see all kinds of circumstances for people to have empathy for. And I think that it really worked. Now, the idea of showing scars and violence, it's very different to see a scar on somebody that was injured and use your imagination to feel what they felt, rather than to see somebody laying on the ground, with blood pouring out of them. That's a very different kind of violence. The one violence, it's easy to turn your head from because it's so graphic. The person is much harder to turn your head away from, because if you can relate to the humanness of the situation, then you're hooked into it. So on the flip side of that, gun violence has become the norm in society, that we have been anesthetized to it. People hear, Jersey City, people shot yesterday, another one. Tomorrow we'll hear it in, Indianapolis. So we have become anesthetized to it because we don't want to think about it. So the thing is that we have to bring it up in the right way, in the way that makes everyone feel that no one is immune. And one of those ways is with children, parents. Parents are Republicans, they're Democrats, they're everything in between. Most parents want their children to be safe. These are the kinds of dialogues that we should be having. What can we do about school shootings? And if you're not, I'm just going to segue to that. I'm working on something with schools where I want kids to do drawings about gun violence. So if you're not afraid in your school, and some kids aren't afraid in their school, you're afraid in your neighborhood because you're walking home and you're going to go by a park where a gang hangs out. And you don't know what's going to happen when you walk by that park. So really, every kid in America has this legacy that we're leaving them. That you're either afraid in your school, you're afraid in the mall, you're afraid in the movie theater, you're afraid on your neighborhood streets. This is horrible. This is something that we have to go above politics and again connect on the humanness. I might not like the fact that you voted for Trump, but I'm so happy that we can talk about schools and school safety. Or if you own a gun and you're a parent, lock your gun up. So many suicides, so many accidents, so many kids are shot. Most of these school shootings, the kids are getting the guns at home. So we have to, I know I went someplace out there. I'll bring it back, but it is off-putting, it is desensitizing, but there are ways that we have to start bringing people back into the dialogue for change.
I have a different question.
Oh,
So the last question, and I'll open this to the audience, is that okay? Is also on the question of not desensitization, but actually the effectiveness that you have noticed with your practice analyzing these objects from this series out of their original context, as well as the work that you have done and continue to do in photographing for the institution. Do you think, in your opinion, is effective? And I guess sort of my little add-on to that is I'm so struck by the Lego figures in particular. I think they're hilarious, but also really terrifying. And sort of like from a personal point of view, as someone who has dealt with anti-Islamic or anti-Muslim sentiment, I wonder how incorporating those types of objects and photographs into just sort of like our everyday, does it have, do you see it having a real impact on Americans across the board? Because I don't think there's such thing as an average American.
so if I understand the question correctly,
I know it's like a 20-part question.
you're asking if me working as a photographer within the institution, if that's effective in perpetuating these narratives, or, okay, so yes, I do think that, which is why I like to create a separation between my studio practice and then what I do in my official capacity as an army photographer, because I do believe that my role as a photographer for the institution, the byproduct of that is that these images are being used to perpetuate whatever narrative they're accompanying. But with that being said, these images are, after all, paid for by the US taxpayer. So these images actually belong to all of us. And they exist on an archive, high resolution, that all of us can download and use. So I actually find interesting how these images are used with opposing narratives. And I think that's sort of the magic of photography, which is, we don't need to look much further than Berger to tell us that whatever text goes along with an image is going to inform the way that we perceive it. So, I think, to your point, they're not necessarily used in the best way. But my images in this show, I feel like, because we are desensitized, because, I think about some of the things that I read while at SVA and after, whether it's Sontag or David Levi-Strauss, about how images are used to perpetuate these ideas of desensitizing us to violence. So because I've already accepted that, because I already, go into my studio saying, to your point, another violent image is not going to change how we look at images. So I find that the nuance in these images of child toys or consumer products is actually far more jarring and far more effective in confronting us and asking us to interrogate these things. How did that?
Yeah, that was great.
I also never thought about how my very high New York City taxes and my federal taxes are going to all of that. So you're welcome. Our military is welcome. And I guess we will open it up for questions.
Truth in photography is a very tricky thing because you're never going to see an objective photo. But the thing I didn't hear anyone mention was truth in photography and how they approach that.
I'm not a photographer, so it's all you guys.
Truth is subjective. So it's open to interpretation. You're gonna do what you believe, hopefully, what you think is the right way to do it, the respectful way to do something, and how someone interprets your work, that's not my problem. If you don't see the way I see it, if you have a different interpretation, it may be a good thing, it may be a bad thing, but I'm gonna present it how I see it, and whether you agree or disagree, I can't control that, and I can't be concerned with that. I can only do it the best that I can. But truth has always been subjective. All we have to do is look at what's happening in our country now. Is there any truth even anymore? Or what is truth? I mean, this idea when I was growing up, I cannot tell a lie, I chopped down the cherry tree. George Washington was a hero because he told the truth. Now we have somebody that's a president who lies mostly every time he says something. What are we saying about truth to our children? This is what concerns me really, how our children see the truth. We have a background in truth and reality, or what truth is. Our children, we should start really thinking about that. What are they going to interpret as truth? How is it going to go after this person has destroyed what truth is in our country? How do we repair that? Where do we go with it? So if I'm trying to be as truthful as I can, to me, I'm satisfied with that. So I can't, we can't be our brother's keeper for everything, I don't think, so.
No, then check.
Oh. No, anybody else?
Sure. I also don't think that there is anything, I don't think that there's anything objectively as truth anymore, and then as somebody that wants to capture it through whatever lens, video or still, I think that you can't help but to put like a heavy bias on it, no matter what you're trying to do. But yeah, I mean, I have to agree with Kathy that there isn't any such thing as truth. That's why I find this work with the closed circuit cameras so fascinating. That those are supposed to be an objective truth, but they're not. For instance, like in the UK, London has more CCTV cameras than anywhere else in the world. It's the most monitored place in the world. And there's this thing in London now that the kids kind of say, which is no face, no case. So everybody is wearing these scarves over their head, you know, just going out in the streets or hanging out with their friends or whatever. And so it just covers their face completely so that they can't get into trouble. But it's a good example of how the camera sees everything. It sees them perfectly, but because of that one error, or because they're not able to make out that person's face, there is no truth there. It can't really support anything. Yeah, so I think that truth is kind of bankrupt at the moment.
I mean, this is such a huge question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's quite all right. I'm gonna respectfully disagree a little bit. I do think that there is such a thing as truth. I think that the problem is that we are now existing in this age where it's a thing of proximity and convenience, and truth is now built on consensus. And I mean, what is truth's relationship to fact? I think that's really a tricky question, you know? I mean, we can talk about it philosophically, but I mean, I know what I know. How I prove it is a very different thing. But you know, this example of George Washington, I mean, that's the furthest guy from what I think of as the truth. You know, because these narratives, and not to point out, I know that was just a metaphor, but I think, you know, these concepts are so hard to grapple with, and I'm not sure that photography is the best medium as evidence. And you know, maybe that's why I haven't addressed it, because I don't think I'm using photography to create truth as specificity. I think I use photography as truth, you know, in a lowercase t, broad way, you know. So I hope that, yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Okay. I guess we should, are you guys going to stick around for a bit? Can people talk to you?
Yeah, sure.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
So I guess the last thing I will say, maybe the last word, is when I actually thought of this exhibition, I almost did American truth in quotes, but then I thought, so much. But so I'll leave it with that. Thank you all so much for being here. Thank you to all of our artists for participating. Melvin, Happy Hector, this was very informative. Thank you all for your time.